started here. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today for the next edition of the Navigating the Coronavirus Economy series, already up to episode 35 here. It's incredible to think how time flies. And as a reminder, at the first of the year, we're going to be transitioning to just have this be a ongoing education and continued learning process for us. So we may end up changing the title of it over time, but that's what we're doing. And I'm so excited for today's episode. My name's Tom Dufour. I'm the CEO of Big Sky Franchise. And today we have John Francis, with us today. And so Johnny comes to us with just an incredible background in franchising. And most notably, what was really exciting has been his experience with advisory boards and his experience as serving as an advisor and helping companies establish advisory boards. And one of the things that really stood out to me with John and with his background is he's really done well in helping especially small businesses and small business owners establish an advisory board. And that really stood out to me. I can say it's something that's been a topic of it's been a topic of consideration and discussion, just even internally at our own company. And so it's been a topic, and I know other clients have been thinking about it too, our clients and other small businesses we're connected with. And so with that being said, we have Mr. John Francis, also known as Johnny Franchise. And Johnny, I'd love to turn things over to you and just have you give a little background about you and share that. And then we'll go into an overview on advisory boards.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to share what I can. And I'm a lucky guy. I think like a lot of folks, I guess, I love what I do. I work really hard, and I love helping people with franchising. My background started, I grew up in a franchise company. My parents started a hair salon franchisor. My dad was actually a barber cutting hair here in Minnesota way back before I was born. And long story short, he innovated and created some great opportunities in the salon business and used franchising as a way to expand and develop, and really created some great opportunities for hair salon owners and also salon owners to become business owners, and really revolutionized, well, maybe not revolutionized, but really improved, I'll say, the industry and the opportunity curve for hairdressers and hair salon owners and stylists and business owners, and created a new way for people to really professionalize the industry at a whole new level. So my mother and father were the founders and franchisor, and grew up that business quite nicely. And I grew up in that business as a kid. I thought everything was a franchise. I thought everybody owned 2 or 3 businesses, and that's what I was used to. My dad was quite an entrepreneur, did a great job in franchising, was a good leader, and he surrounded himself with a lot of talented people, and he really did a great job. I mean, it's a fantastic success story. The company was called The Barbers, and our brands were The Barbers, which is the original brand, and then we added Cost Cutters, and we added City Looks, and we did some acquisitions of a brand called We Care Hair. And I got to do all kinds of stuff in that business, in the salon industry and the salon business, and the franchising of those salons is really where I got to do a lot of work, and did some international work, did some acquisitions and integrations and conversions, did marketing, operations, training, franchise sales, development, real estate, finance, strategic planning, all kinds of really cool stuff. But anyway, we grew that business up and up and up. And again, long story short, my father passed away. My mother took over in the 90s and actually doubled the size of the company, and took it from 500 to 1,000 stores, and moved us up to the NASDAQ. We were publicly traded back in the 90s when it was relatively easy to be a public traded company. So then I had a tragedy in the family. My brother passed away, and kind that was the upset to the apple cart, if you will. And one thing led to another. We wound up selling the whole business. My mother wanted to retire, and it was a great time. The late 90s, things were going crazy, and the multiples were high, and our company was profitable and debt-free and no litigation. I mean, we had a 36-year track record of success, and it was a great outcome for everybody. It changed my career path. Wasn't what I expected, but you can't really get in the way of that. And I went with the deal. We sold to Regis Corporation, which is a great big hair salon franchisor. And back in those days, it was a lot different than it is today. And this is 20 years ago. We sold our business in 1999. So I took some time off and did some other things, and because I had the opportunity to enjoy what I would call a fantastic severance agreement, which I figured I'll never get again, to get paid to not work, which was really unbelievable. But I guess that's part of the non-compete, right? I had to give up a lot of the opportunity I had built up
Sure.
as part of the deal. It was part of the deal. So anyway, I went on to move into a few other brands as a franchisee and an area developer, and as a franchisor. I got to work with a number of different brands in retail, service centers, business owners, a roundtable, kind of a peer group model that I got involved with, some restaurant brands. I did some consulting work, just a variety of things. I got to kind of explore and get involved in a lot of things that I like to do, which is franchising. So for the last, I spent about 10 years, my highest profile activity was with a brand called PostNet. I was an area developer and a multi-unit owner in the PostNet brand. They were based out of Denver, and had a great run there. Had a lot of fun with that group. Great people, great business, very competitive, and it was tough. It was hard work, but we had a good run with that. Then I wound up transitioning to the corporate side of that brand. Worked for the franchisor for a little while as they called me a strategic advisor, which was perfect because it was vague and it allowed me to do a lot of things to help that brand. And I had great experience and credibility there. Got deeper involved in the IFA at that time in the early 2000s, and I guess late 2000, the first decade of the century, whatever you call those years. And then when that recession came through, 2008, 9, and 10, things really started to change again, and I shifted gears again and started doing more advisory and consulting work. And so really for probably the last 7 or 8 years, I've been what I call a freestyle consultant, or a reluctant consultant to the franchise industry, because I really didn't advertise or promote myself. I would just kind of show up and ask questions, and had a great network and a lot of friends, and a great history and experience in the franchise universe. And my mom and dad are in the IFA Hall of Fame, which is a fantastic recognition, and they deserve it. I mean, they really did do some fantastic things in the industry, and some of the things we did as a franchisor are commonplace now that were innovated in our brand, in our company here in Minnesota. So I took that background and all that experience, and I've been able to find opportunities to work with a number of different brands and do a lot of different things. And it usually comes down to, I try to leave something in place more than just me coming in, do my thing and leave. And one of those things to leave behind is a structural improvement called a board of advisors, which I guess is the topic for today. So I'll maybe transition a little bit and talk about that. I actually started serving on boards a long time ago, and I guess the experience began in a peer group setting, and these are pretty common. They're out there, and there's some new interesting opportunities coming into the franchise space around peer groups for franchisors and things of that nature. But I learned a lot by working with other business owners on their business. And in a group setting, it's a little more dynamic because everyone's got a different business. So while you're all going around the table working on each other's issues, you learn and you see and you get to understand a lot of different things. But I really like a board of advisors when it's specific to a business and where you've got one organization that you're focused on, and you can really drill in and go deeper into what's going on in that company and really make a bigger impact for that business owner. Now, a board of advisors is different than a board of directors, right? I think most people probably understand this, but I'll just talk about it a little bit. a board of directors is typically, and I'm not a lawyer, so, forgive me for the lawyers out there, I can probably explain this better, but a board of advisors is kind of a required structural component of a corporation. Usually it's the same people who own the business are the board of directors, right? It's the founder and his wife maybe, or her husband, or whoever might be around at the time the thing starts. So a board of directors is formal, it's legal, there's liabilities and responsibilities, and it's a serious thing to be on a board of directors. And I serve on 3 board of directors today, and it's fun. I really enjoy it, but it's a little different. The board of directors has some voting and some fiduciary, and there's other, like I said, complexities, I guess, that go into the board of directors. A board of advisors, on the other hand, is much less formal, much easier, I think, to implement and to manage. And a board of advisors is really just that. They give advice, right? They don't vote. They don't have shares necessarily. They're not stockholders. They don't have any power, really. They're there to help that owner, that founder, that leadership team really manage themselves. And they become, it's been called the balance point between ownership and management. Right. And they help hold people accountable. They help set priorities. They help solve problems. They help in a variety of ways. A lot of great things. And I can go on and on all day. But so I've been serving on board of advisors as well for about 10 years. And today I think I serve on 4, advisory boards or board of advisors. It's still the same kind of work. It's a lot of fun because you show up, you ask questions, you offer ideas, you try to help, and then you leave. And the company, whoever's running that business, it's their job to do the work and run the business. The board does not run the business. A board of advisors, a board of directors, the phrase I like is noses in, fingers out, right? You might be in there kind of looking around and ask a lot of questions and make sure everything is on the up and up, but you're really not in control in the sense of day to day, that's for sure. So an advisory board, I think, is an underutilized structure that a lot of entrepreneurs could really find good value in. And I think the reason entrepreneurs really don't know about it or don't really consider it very often is they don't understand it, and it's kind of this mystery, and it seems expensive and it seems complicated. And I guess what I can share today is it does not have to be expensive, and it does not have to be complicated. And there's far more value to be gained by setting up and utilizing a board of advisors than there really is risk. There's, I would say, almost no risk if you set it up properly. It really can't hurt you. So I can go on and on, but I think that's probably good enough background to kind of set the table for today. Huh?
Yeah, no, that's perfect, John. Thank you so much for that. And by the way, you one of my favorite accolades that you received was you were recognized as the Franchisee of the Year by the IFA. So
Yeah.
I'll just toot your own horn for you there.
Well,
that's pretty impressive.
No accident.
Award.
You don't win those awards by just showing up. You have to do something spectacular. And yeah, I was lucky. I had some great opportunities, worked really hard, and I was recognized. So thank you for mentioning that.
Well, it's an impressive recognition. So I appreciate, and in addition to all of your other success in your career, and why I'm thankful and grateful for you being here. Now, one of the questions I'm sure that's burning in everyone's mind, I know it's in mine, is okay, John, I'm sold. You sold me on advisory boards. Okay, now what? Okay, now I'm the owner. I'm the entrepreneur. Okay, I want to do this, but what do I do? How do I find these people? What do I pay them something? Don't I pay them? Do I meet every month or every quarter? Or, how do I structure the meetings? I don't know. So fill me in.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to do it. Thank you. And what I would suggest is there are some resources out there. I have a website, johnnyfranchise.com is my website. I've written a lot of blogs on this. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've got some great stories there. No, I'm sorry, Tom. I'm getting somebody is joining our thing. Is that you're okay with that? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. We'll manage that for you here.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are some great resources out there about boards and board of advisors or advisory boards doing this sort of thing. Actually, I've just recently got turned on to a book written, a woman wrote it who's in Washington, D.C. area. It's a fantastic book. So there are books. If you look around, you can find them. And there's resources, I would say, learn and study and get familiar. And, you know, you don't just throw yourself into it. I think it's better to have a little bit of planning and a little bit of support. And, you know, this is something I do for clients, you know, from time to time. It's an opportunity to help set up a board. But my advice is the way I approach it, I guess, and I'll try to answer those questions, and I'm sure there's more, but I approach it in a 3-phase process. There's 3 things you got to do. The first is the why. You got to understand why you're doing an advisory board. And so what is it? Well, it's to help the owner make better decisions. I think that's obvious maybe, but that's certainly part of it. To hold the owners accountable, which can be a little delicate and sometimes uncomfortable. I think that's why a lot of entrepreneurs are resistant. They're like, I don't want someone telling me what I can or can't do. Well, an advisory board has no power. They don't have the checkbook. They don't have any votes. They can't veto or approve anything. So an advisory board doesn't have that kind of ability to fire you from your own company, right? I've heard some horror stories, but I've never been part of that. I guess advisory boards don't do that sort of thing. So the first is the why. So you really need to understand why you're doing this and kind of what you want from it. Why are you doing it? What are the expectations that you want of your board members, and what expectations should they have of you in doing it? So that's kind of part one. When I do this work, I've got a Dropbox folder full of resources about boards and advisory boards, and I share a bunch of articles. I say, read everything. Let's talk for an hour or two. Let me make sure you've just got good clarity about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you expect this to work, how it's going to work for you, because it's a little different for everybody. But that's number one, the why. Number two, the second part is really the how, kind of the nuts and bolts of we're going to pay people, we're going to meet with certain frequency, we're going to generate a lot of information and share that information, and then we're going to hold a board meeting. And how is that going to work? I guess generally speaking, when a board is new, I say, you know, depending on the environment and the people you're bringing in and how familiar they might or might not be, sometimes I suggest you start with a high frequency meeting. And that means maybe you meet every month for, like, let's say 3 months, just to get people up the learning curve, and you get to see the chemistry of the board members if they don't really know each other. And you know, they want to learn and understand what's going on. So it takes a little time to get that learning curve. So I say, if you meet for 3 months right away, that usually sets the pace, and you'll know if your board is working or not pretty quickly. Then you go every other month, maybe for 3 months. So that's another 6 months or 3 meetings. So in the first 9 months, you would have 6 meetings, if that makes sense. And then you go on a quarterly basis, and you just maintain that quarterly pace, because that's generally enough frequency to manage and help and validate really what needs to be done at the board level. So that's kind of the how. And then the who is also part of number 2, or the second phase, is who's on that board. And, you know, I suggest an advisory board should be at least 3 people. I think probably 5 is a good number, because you get enough kind of diversity of perspective and opinion and history and point of view. And if you have 6 or 7, I mean, that's getting a little heavy. And if you have 9 or 10, that's probably way too much. You know, you'll never get anything done. So I guess 5 is kind of a sweet spot, maybe 5 people. So usually I tell the founder, I say, you need 3 people on your board. At least 3 types of people. One, the first thing for an advisory board, again, this is not a board of directors, this is an advisory board. I say, put somebody on there who you know and trust, like family, like maybe your spouse, maybe a sibling, maybe your parent, maybe a neighbor, maybe some friend from school, somebody who, no matter what, you have confidence they have got your back. They will never cross you. They're loyal. They're someone you've got deep trust and respect for, right? Whoever that is in your life, that should be, I think, one person on that around that table. Number 2, I recommend you get a good lawyer or a business person who's a senior person, who's been around, who's done a lot of stuff, maybe in your industry, maybe not in your industry, but maybe a retired lawyer, maybe your current lawyer, if you can convince them to serve on the board with no fee or no conflicts. But a good, smart business person who's been around and done a lot of work. I think just a lot of transactional work, a lot of experience, someone who's just really got that broad perspective of the business and who's been in stuff that's bigger than you, right? You don't want someone who's a startup just figuring it out. Obviously you want someone to bring their experience, their network, their skills, their perspective. So that's number two. Number three, I like to see a financial person on that board, whether it's a banker, a CPA, again, somebody who's going to look at your financials in a new way. I can look at financial statements. I can ask a lot of questions, but I'm not a CPA. I don't have that kind of training or experience. A CFO, a retired CFO, a retired investment banker, someone who's used to looking at a lot of numbers and can ask really intelligent questions about the economics of your business. So those are the first three people on the board in my suggestion, is kind of those people. Then beyond that, at an advisory board, I think, again, you want generally people you know, trust, and respect. I mean, they have to be people of integrity, people who have something they're bringing to you. I say sometimes the board, you might fill out the board. It depends on what stage you're at. A lot of the brands I work with are what I would say middle stage growth phase. They're not so much a startup, but they're growing and they're growing fast. And they know that they really want to make some good decisions and avoid some big disasters. And that's where a board of advisors can really help that owner kind of predict what's coming and deal with what's happening and maybe avoid or handle some issues as they come along. So someone who's kind of been where you are, I would say, if that's maybe hard to define, but like if you're growing and expanding, and let's say, for example, let's say an owner is at the point where they really want to do better budgeting or better strategic planning, or they're really trying to kind of up their game, then you bring on someone to your board who you feel has done that. And maybe they've done it 2 or 3 times. Maybe they're a retired competitor. You'd be surprised, depending on the industry you're in and personalities and complexities, you're going to be careful, right? But sometimes a retired competitor can be a tremendous asset on the board because they know the industry. They've got relationships out there. They can see and predict well beyond what you're gonna see in real life. If a company is going for, or they have ambition for, say, private equity, which is kind of a big deal for a lot of these founders, and I've had my share of those kind of opportunities. And I think the number one thing is a good board can run interference on projects like that, so it does not become a distraction from the day-to-day run the business. You may or may not have a transaction, but you're going to do an awful lot of work around those transactions. And a board of advisors or some of that board or some of those people could be engaged to help handle that so it does not become a distraction to actually running the business. Companies going through acquisitions or mergers or dispositions. One of my clients actually just this month is selling off a major chunk of their business. And the board is involved very much so in helping that happen because they still got to run the company. And what's left of the company will be better off without the piece they're selling. But, it's complicated. So it's good to have that board in place before you wish you did, right? A board, if a company's going international, maybe they think international is an appropriate strategy for them. You could put somebody with international experience on your board of advisors. So it's kind of obvious maybe, but probably not so much, but you're looking for people who have skills and experience of where you want to go. What's around the corner for you this year, next year, or 5 years from now? You put those people on your board of advisors so they're familiar and comfortable and trusted and engaged, and they can help you make better choices to get you where you're headed a lot faster and with less pain and suffering. The third phase, I don't know if I'm on track here, but the third phase is really launch. I say you go through the why and how you're going to do it, the structure, and the who. You pick the people we've been talking about. The third piece is just pick a date and go. And you need 3 things for a good board meeting. You need a time and a place. That's, I guess, one thing. You need good information. You need to put out the materials. And I say, here's an agenda, a sample. You're going to have these kind of points on your agenda. The board needs financial information, operational summaries, updates and issues lists, or whatever, whatever you have. I say, don't start generating a bunch of new information. Give them what you already have. Pull from what's already available internally, but give that information to the board at least a week in advance of the meeting. You want them to read that and be prepared so that at the meeting, you're actually talking about issues. You're not saying, oh, what's new and how'd that go? You can get all that preliminary update stuff out of the way before you're physically online or in person. And then the third piece of that meeting is a facilitator. Someone has to drive that meeting and manage the clock and manage the agenda. And I like doing that. I do that as a service, I guess. Again, sometimes it's hard for the founder to run their own meeting. It's hard to be the content leader and the process leader at the same time. It's two different skill sets, and you really want the owner focused on the content and the discussion, asking questions, listening to answers, and listening to the feedback. Somebody else can facilitate the conversation and make sure you stay on track and everybody gets heard. And so facilitation, I think, is an important part, especially in the beginning. Because those first few meetings, if it's a disaster, it's not going to work. But if the first few meetings go well, chances are you'll have a few more and you'll see the value from your new board. It may take a few meetings, it may take a few months before you really start to see the value. But if you do it right and careful, and there's just tremendous value that comes from a board. A lot of things you can do with an advisory board that you just can't do if you don't have one. So that's kind of a basic startup. Do you pay these people? I think that's a common question. My answer is yes. If they're all volunteers and it's a nonprofit organization, that's one thing. They're there for the cause. They're volunteering. They're looking for that volunteer opportunity. In a private for-profit business, I don't think that's appropriate. I think you definitely want to pay these people for their time and their expertise. You want to respect that. You can expect more from them if you're paying them, and they will expect more from you if they're getting paid. Believe me, it raises the bar on the expectations and professionalism, and I think that's really valuable. So do you need to pay $10,000 per person per meeting? Probably not. If you're a small private company, I would say it's a fraction of that. I've got some of this. I've answered these questions on my blog, on my website, but I think typically, for a small private company, a board meeting, you might pay $500 or $1,000 per member per meeting. And that meeting might be 4 hours. It might take half the day. I've been in meetings that go multiple days. Sometimes we get a lot of going on. Usually it's a half day, or, I can't sit through a phone call for more than 2 hours. It's just too much. So you might do a 2-hour segment and take a 15-minute break and come back and do the second half of the meeting, and break it up over time. But yeah, you pay those people $500 or $1,000 a meeting. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 outs, you don't pay the inside people, you only pay the outside people. It might cost you 3,000 or 4,000. I'm making this up. It's kind of what you think you can afford, which might sound like a lot of money, but over time, over the course of a year, if your board costs you, say, $10,000, I don't know, I'm kind of speculating, you're going to get that kind of value from that board. If you're paying that out, you're going to have expectations. You're going to engage at a deeper level. It just really helps, I think, facilitate the professionalism of operating and managing and engaging with your board when you pay them. Some of the bigger boards, bigger companies, of course, pay more than that. Some people wouldn't even think of it. Some people wouldn't serve on a board at paid that little because it feels like you're volunteering. So it's really a matter of what can you afford and what are they willing to take, and what's their motivation. Sometimes it's usually more than just money for these board members. I serve on boards because I like the people, I like their business, and I think I can really add value. And then I'll stay on that board as long as that makes sense for me. I've come off of boards. The secret is you can always resign from a board, and you can always be released from a board, especially a board of advisors. It's very, you just say, hey, it's not working, thanks for everything, and you're off the board. It doesn't have to be complicated. An advisory board, you can do that. The board of directors, not so much, right? It's much more formal, and more legal requirements involved to come or go from a board of
Johnny,
directors.
just to interrupt you really quickly
Sure.
on that, because we're talking about startup, and then as you're getting toward this kind of maybe as the board matures,
Mhm.
is there a common is there a frequency of rotating people in and out? Do people stay on long term? What have you seen, and what do you generally recommend?
It's a good question. And the answer is I see a lot of people stick around for a long time. And I think sometimes most times that's okay. It's because you trust them, you like them, and you want that continuity. You want someone who's got the history and really understands kind of where you came from and how you got there. But also, you want to have new people come on when things change, right? I mean, I've been on boards where people just they don't want to do it anymore. They're retired and they're just not interested, and so you phase them out and you say thanks for your service. But before they go, you want to have two identified replacements, so you can interview them and they may want to talk to each other, and just not that they're filling the same shoes, because you want a different set of skills or experience, different perspective. So I say, generally speaking, people stay on the board as long as it makes sense, for them as the board member. And then I think as long as it makes sense for the company or the leader, if that board member is contributing and participating and you're feeling like it's good value, they stay. But I don't know. I'm thinking of couple of things at the same time here, but I can think of a couple of situations where I've helped other people remove people from their board, right? Because it's like, I can't say that to him. I'm like, well, okay, I'll do it. Let me do it. Then tell him he's going to get a call from me and we're going to have a talk about his service on the board. What do you mean? Well, you have to be able to have those tough conversations. And sometimes for certain situations, it's really, really difficult. And that's when, especially then, you want to have a board who can help you, coach you, or maybe step in and help you execute those conversations. I can think of one situation was particularly difficult where the son of the founder had to be let go. And very complicated, very difficult, emotional. And like, how are we going to do this? I said, I'll do it. I'll do it with you. I won't do it for you. I'll do it with you. And that made all the difference in the world. That allowed it to happen. Finally, took a long time. It was a little overdue, but without having me or somebody like me available to help facilitate that tough conversation, we wouldn't have made it, or it wouldn't have been executed very well. It could have been a real relationship destroyer, which we really didn't want. This is not about destroying relationships. It's about moving a business forward. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It does. No,
it's a delicate thing, sometimes.
no, thank you. I appreciate that. And Johnny, we had another question come in that
Sure.
asks, does your business structure determine if you have a board of directors, a board of trustees, or board of advisors? Does that make any difference there?
That's a real good question. I would say, first, I would say ask a lawyer because I'm not a lawyer. But I think if you're a nonprofit and you have a board of trustees, that's more like a board of directors. And I've served on nonprofit boards of trustees. I've done that and had a great experience doing that. Public company board of directors are very serious. They're regulated by the Securities Exchange, the SEC. I mean, there's lots of stuff there involved. Small private companies is kind of where I live. And so small private companies, I think, are required to have a board of directors by statute, by whatever state you're registered in as a entity. But those board of directors are, they might have one meeting a year and it's kind of filing the annual paperwork or whatever. It might not be too serious in terms of activity level, where a board of advisors, I think anybody can have a board of advisors. I don't think there's any real requirement or limitations. I've actually had a good friend of mine he created his own personal board of advisors for his own career and mentoring. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. He had his board. We never met together as a group, but this guy put 3 or 4 people. He said, you're going to be on my board. I'm like, okay. And he took us through all his stuff and we helped him through I guess, a transitional period in his life. And it worked out great. The guy went on to do great things, and he got the advice and mentoring that he was looking for. But there was no requirement for that. It was just an individual. So I don't know that the organizational structure require, I think there's a board of directors requirement, a board of trustees requirement in the appropriate setting. And I think a board of advisors can come and go as needed. The other thing, I'll just mention this, sometimes a board of advisors shows up in an organization for a particular focus area. It might be a medical device company, and they have a board of advisors that's focused on the medical community or the medical component of that business. I've served on a board of advisors for a software company. I'm not a software guy, so they had like a tech advisory board that was all about the technology and the specific to the industry of that business, separate from, I guess, what I've been talking about is a business board of advisors, just generally helping the owners and the leadership team or the management team, perform at a higher level.
So Johnny, as a follow-up to that, it sounds like as you develop, especially for a small business, most of our community is a small business community, as they get maybe their first general board of advisors going, maybe they start growing or things start flourishing. And maybe in this case, maybe they franchise their business. A lot of that's what our clients are doing. They franchise their business. We help them through that process, and they set up maybe a franchise board of advisors, or maybe they launch a new product or a new service, and they need that, as you're saying, it sounds like you're saying, you bring in a board maybe specific for that might be a 3-year run that helps them kind of start, implement, launch, and then it kind of maybe phases out or phases into a new program. Is my understanding correct?
Yeah, yes, your understanding is correct. And I would phrase that something else though. I would phrase that more of a advisory board, or I would use the term task force, right? Because I think by nature, boards and committees tend to be long-term, right?
Okay.
A board generally is set up and stays in place. It's the people that make up that board might change over time, but the board as a structure might stay in place. I'm a big fan of franchising. Obviously, that's where I live. And so internally in a brand, they might set up a franchise advisory council. That's completely different. That's an internal group of franchisees that help corporate internally deal with new programs or grievances or other ideas and programs and initiatives internal to a brand. That's a franchisee advisory council. That's something else. An advisory board for the owners is more of a corporate board of advisors, I guess is what I would call it, just to make sure there's a separation of their purpose and function. They're totally separate. But a task force or a new initiative board or something that might be expected to be organized, utilized, and then disbanded would be more of, I would call that a task force, or more of a specific assignment. This is a project, we're doing this, and when this is over, this board is over.
Hey, Tom, this is Steve Gallagher. I had a quick question. Okay.
Yeah, please. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, congratulations on starting Big Sky. I've been following you, and you deserve a lot of credit. These webinars, I see them come out all the time. They're great.
Well, thank you. Glad you're here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and John, really great information. So as Tom knows, we had a relationship early on, and then Tom moved on, and so it's great to get reacquainted here. But I own a digital marketing company, and when I started the company, I had a board of advisors. And what attracted me about today's webinar is I'm getting back into it. So I've taken a lot of notes, and everything you're saying is A, spot on, and B, just great reinforcement for you. But I did have one kind of a technical question, and I love sort of the makeup and the framework of who would be on a board. I'm curious. You mentioned, a financial person, maybe a banker. Is it a conflict of interest to have your banker on your board of advisors, or are you better to have an independent person?
I would say it's probably not a conflict because it's a board of advisors and not a board of directors. Board of directors, maybe, there's because it's fiduciary in that case.
Sure.
The board of advisors is much less formal and much more flexible. So I would think, I usually say if you ask your accountant and your lawyer to serve on your board and do it for free, right? For no charge, I should say. Nothing's
Yeah.
free, but included in their normal billings, because they're going to understand your business a lot better. They're
Yeah.
going to help you execute or facilitate any other transactions that may come along, where they'll be engaged to do the legal work or the accounting work or the tax work or whatever it might be.
Okay.
But that's not always appropriate. Sometimes you do want a second opinion or a different point of view.
Right.
I think it's up to the owner, and I guess what I want to make sure you understand is a board should be flexible. When you establish when I do this with clients, I say, well, let's put it right in writing, right? You've got your here's how this is going to work, and you put it in writing, and you say that this board is going to change over time.
Yeah.
And your role will change over time. So you make it clear that you could be asked to no longer serve, really, for any reason or no reason at all. You have to have the ability to have full discretion and full flexibility. So you may bring in a banker or a CPA or a finance person, and they may sit through 2 or 3 meetings, and then you realize it's not the right person for whatever reason. Chemistry is wrong, or their availability. I've had that where guys, oh, I'll serve on your board, but they can't ever make any meetings. Well, what's the point? So you let them free, set them free, and put somebody else in that spot. So you got to have that expectation right up front. This advisory board is there to serve the owner, and it's at the discretion of the owner or the founder or whoever's signing the checks, I guess. And so you want to have that flexibility and set that straight up from the front, because then when it happens, it's not frustrating or disappointing. You remind them of that from time to time. This board is going to change as I see fit. And you bring people in for a meeting or two, and they may have a particular area of focus or an expertise or consultants. I've been that guy to show up on a board meeting just to tighten up the board. And then I'll give the owner feedback after the meetings, and I'm only there for 1 or 2 meetings. And I was never really on the board, but I was there to help strengthen the board and give them advice and feedback on who and how to make changes there, So I wasn't really a board member, but I showed up, and, so it's a matter of having the flexibility, I think, is really critical.
So most, the leadership of a bank, senior management, they don't have a problem if the loan officer or the VP of lending, whatever, the person who handles your account, they don't have a problem with them being on a board of advisors typically.
I haven't seen it. I think they certainly need to get approval. I mean, there's a time commitment. They're going to be out of the office for whatever period of time. But, if anything else, it does a number of things. First of all, it strengthens that relationship with that individual and their business as a client. So that's a real opportunity. And secondly, sometimes the other board members are the most interesting part of serving on a board. I've had some great relationships come out from other boards where I'm there to serve the owner, but after 4 or 5 meetings, you get to know the other board members pretty well, and they turn into great resources and great part of your network. So I would say having that guy at the meeting, and if there's 3 or 4 other people at that meeting who he doesn't know, they're at a professional level, that's great value as well. So, there's a lot of good that can come from serving on the board.
If you had to choose between a CPA and a banker, which would you think would be more valuable?
Oh boy, that's hard to answer. It kind of depends more, I guess, on who they are and what experience they have relative to what your needs are.
Sure.
I like CPAs because, they tend to see the tax impact is usually a big blind side for a lot of owners. They don't realize what they're doing is going to create some taxes or some strategy around taxes. Let's just say that where a banker might be looking at things more as a transactional or more of a credit risk, financial risk. They've got a little different lens they're looking at. Maybe you put them both on there, and let them compare notes and see how they, you can ask a question and see how they answer. And then I just want to say this, another thing that might answer your question, Steve, is put them both on there and then talk to them in between meetings and say, well, what do you think? What do you think of the other guy? What do you think? A lot of the fun of a board meeting is not just the meeting, what happens between the board meetings.
Right.
So I've been tasked, and I've written about this on my blog, where I'll get a call from a client where I only serve on their board. So I really only see them 3 or 4 times a year, right? Otherwise, they're kind of out of sight, out of mind. I'm busy doing my thing and they're running their thing. And when there's a board meeting, we get engaged and go deep and have some great meeting, and then we move on and you wait for the next one. And every once in a while, I'll get a call from a client who says, I got a real hotspot issue. I need some advice. What do you think? Can I do this? Sure. And I'll spend the time on the phone and take down the issue, whatever it is, and we'll sort it out and give them the answer, and bam, they're done. And having that board member relationship and having the understanding of them, I know who they are. I know who their company is. I know who their people are. I know that the context of their situation when something blows up and they need some help to make a decision right now. They can't wait for a meeting. That is so valuable for that owner to have maybe 3 or 4 people they could call on, whether you call an emergency meeting or you just pick up the phone. If I see it come through and it's so-and-so and I'm like, oh, it's my client, I'm going to answer that call, right?
I just did it last week. I had one question. I
Sure.
kind of knew where I wanted to go, and it was interesting. So I have 3 people now. Each of them had sort of a different response. So I've got the third one to reach out to, but those calls can last 10 or 15 minutes. They're really quick, but the insight that you get instantly, and that's what I've told them all, once a quarter is what I'm thinking about, but I follow what you say about maybe a little more in the beginning, but just that one quick answer. It doesn't need to be an hour-long conversation. 10 or
Right.
15
And
minutes.
because they know you and they understand your environment and you've got confidence and trust, it's not like you got to educate them, right? They already know what's going on.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is sort of a best practice. I don't know, I can transition to some of these ideas is, how do you really get value out of a board? You send the board book, we used to call it. It used to be physically, they'd send me a binder, great, whatever. Send it to them, give me a week to look at it. If you send it to me the night before, I'm not going to look at it, right? You send it to me the day before, it's unlikely. Give me a week. Now you can expect that I'll carve an hour or 2 and I'll get into that book and I'll get through it and I'll be totally prepared, right? So send it to me in advance, number 1. Number 2, I would say send your board a brief update, maybe every month. A lot of the best practices are, they send the board, here's a brief update, here's what's going on, like 1 page, maybe 2 pages, just so that there's some continuity. If I don't see or hear from you, I'm not thinking about you, right? I got my own business, I'm running, I'm going in 10 directions like everybody else. But if you send me an update, I'll read it. And if you ask me for feedback, I'll provide it. And you don't have to pay me for that. It's not like you're taking me off of my schedule or anything, So in between meetings, provide some updates. And so that when the meeting book comes along and say, oh yeah, we heard about this already. It's not like a lot of new information. It's maybe deeper and more detailed, but you've got some awareness of what's been going on in that business. If your board meetings are too far apart, I had one company, I served on their board and they met every 6 months. And I said, it's too much. It's like starting over every time we meet 6 months later. It's like, I wasn't even here before. So much has changed. And I can't do that. I said, can you move can we go a little more frequent? And the guy couldn't do it. So I resigned. I'm like, well, good. Then somebody else can do this. It's driving me nuts, right? I couldn't be I didn't feel good about the value I could provide because there was just too much time between the meetings and there was nothing in between. So every time I showed up, it's like the first time. And that was frustrating. So I couldn't, I didn't want to do it anymore. But it's just an advice, I guess. You got to figure out what works for you and what's going to create the value that you're looking for from the time and money that you're spending and your board members are spending.
That's great. Thank you. And other questions for Johnny while we've got him here? Feel free to chime in. We'll keep this to a Q&A and open discussion.
Well, I'll just keep sharing some best practices, I guess. What do I see at board meetings?
Sure.
The part of the fun, at least what used to be pre-COVID, when we could actually travel, get on an airplane and go through the airports and hotels and everything and have in-person meetings. I think a lot of the fun of developing a good solid board, a board of directors or board of advisors is the non-meeting time, right? We meet for dinner usually the night before. everyone flies in. Let's say you got a meeting on Wednesday, so everybody flies in on Tuesday, and you go for dinner at 7:30 to some fabulous place. You know, they take you to some nice place. It doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. So I've done it at the guy's house, like have a barbecue at their house. Fantastic. That kind of those opportunities where you can just kind of be, and there's no agenda, there's no discussion, you're just talking and getting to know each other. That really builds those relationships with the board members, with you as the owner and your board member one-on-one, but also between the board members. And once they understand who each other are a little better, you'll get a lot more value out of those board meeting discussions, because they'll play off of each other. Well, you were in that industry, didn't you have this? And you know, they might draw it out of each other. They might answer each other's questions. But when you get that kind of cohesiveness of those board members really have trust, and they're interested in each other, and they develop, you know, that network, and those relationships really develop and evolve. It's really fun. And like I've said, some of the best things I've gotten out of board service is meeting the other board members who go on to do other things. And maybe we serve on another board, or we do some other kind of deal together, or whatever. Those relationships are what, to me, that's what makes it a lot of fun. And so creating those opportunities outside of the board meeting, you know, the meeting is, you know, you've got relative structure around the meeting time and the agenda and the materials, and, you know, you got a lot to cover, but having some fun in between meetings and before or after, or otherwise, I think that's important, something to add to your strategy. If you're really going to have an effective board, you want to know these people, they want to know you as a personal individual, and they need to know each other and build that trust and understanding of how we can really work together to help this business go forward. I think another best practice, I'll just keep going here, Tom, you tell me when to stop, but another great idea that I suggest to people to use, even with just an advisory board, is, let's say the advisory board meeting is Wednesday from 9 to 1, and you're going to bring in a box lunch or whatever, fine. For the first, you might have 2 parts to the meeting. You might have a 2-part meeting. The first part of the meeting is like general corporate updates, general whatever, like let's get some of the easy stuff out of the way, if there is such a thing. And then you break, like I say, you might take a 5-minute break if you're online, and then you come back, and the second part of the meeting is more owner issues, where you're dealing with like balance sheet issues or transactions or higher level accountability, succession planning, you know, big owners. So the first part of the meeting is more business nuts and bolts, you know, strategy and up to dates. At that front end of that first meeting, you might bring in some of your executive team to present to the board. Sometimes you bring in your vice president of whatever, whether it's finance or operations or marketing or technology. You bring in that leadership team, and you give them 5 or 10 minutes exposure to the board of advisors or the board of directors. And the executives are there, and you bring in your guy and you say, here, I want you to give a 5-minute update to the board about what you're dealing with and any issues. That goes a long way in developing that person as a professional executive. For someone to sit and present to a board is kind of, you know, maybe something they've never done before. And it has this kind of mystique, you know, I have a board meeting presentation, you know, they may, depending on how they respond to that opportunity, can sometimes really tell you what kind of executive you have there. And I say, again, I talked earlier about some of the hard questions a board can ask. I've been that board member to say, you know, what do you want me to ask this person that you can't ask them yourself? And they're like, oh boy, you know, well, why don't you ask them about this project that went sideways? And, you know, how do they know that I know? It doesn't matter. What matters is the way I ask that question to that executive, and the way they respond to that question in front of the board can be very powerful. Not to sabotage or Shanghai somebody where they didn't see it coming, but to, I would say, pressure test your executive team. How are you going to handle somebody like me asking a very difficult question, and I want the answer and I want it now? And I'm not attacking them. I'm not destroying them. I'm really trying to get an answer that we can move forward with and understand what went wrong or what went right, or what, why, and how we can learn from that. So having those executives deliver a little bit of time to the board can sometimes be very helpful, very insightful. And over time, they get more comfortable. Again, they develop relationships with the board members, which can be very valuable I've been involved in situations where somebody was about ready to, let's just say, self-destruct in terms of their career. And they called me and said, you're somebody I know and trust, and you know what's going on. Can I just talk to you? And I'll say, sure, let's talk. And I'll talk them off the edge, so to speak, and say, that's really not necessary. Let me give you some other ideas, and maybe here's a different way to address that situation you're struggling with. And so having that board as a resource to your team, even though that might not be the organized structure of it, but creating that relationship and that trust is very valuable. Again, a good advisory board that's pretty well engaged can really create a lot of value in a lot of ways. One more thing, I'll just mention this, Tom, because I think it's really important. A lot of owners don't think about this, especially founders and entrepreneurs who are just going as fast as they can. A good board of advisors might step up in terms of what I would call disaster planning or a tragedy response, however you want to call it. Somebody gets hurt or killed or sick, or otherwise is sort of not available to run the business, especially if it's a small business wound up around that entrepreneur. If there's an advisory board that's in place and been engaged at a deep level, chances are they could keep the wheels on things for a little while and either recruit or bring in a new executive if that's an option, or help manage that business for sale for the benefit of the estate or whatever might be the case. All kinds of situations. But I think a lot of times, especially young entrepreneurs, they're not thinking about what if something goes wrong here. And I've talked to owners, and I'll say to the guy, I hear the conversation, I would say, yeah, this is great business. You've been working on this for 10 years. It's fantastic. Look at what you built. It's great, great, great. I say, what would happen if you left? Not without announcement, just you left, you walked out the door and you never came back. What do you think would happen to this company? How long would it survive without you? How long would it take? Probably not very long. 30 days, right? I mean, depending on how that owner has structured their organization and their accountability and their responsibility and, how big and whatever, it wouldn't take much to crush that company if that owner disappeared. So say, that could happen, right? Unexpectedly, unpredictable. But if you have a board and the board helps you create what I would call a disaster plan or a continuity plan, and not that people need to know exactly what the plan is, they just want to know that there is a plan, creates a lot of confidence, people are like, oh, okay, great. There's a board in place. The board, they don't run the show, but they could help if we need them, right? If something tragic happens, maybe a board member could jump in there and keep the wheels on things so you can straighten it out and figure out what to do with that business, rather than just watching it just slam into the ground in a spectacular failure. It's what I would call that. That's avoidable. If you have a board and if you task the board with this is something I want you to be able to do, and let's talk about it. Let's make a plan around that. Hopefully we never have to deal with those kind of things. But if you don't have a board, they're not going to step up, right? That's for sure. So I think it's one of those things. I really think a board of advisors is something that most business owners who are growing and really want to grow fast and smart, it's very low risk. It's going to cost a little bit of time and probably a little more money than but it doesn't have to be expensive. It's not a deal breaker, and the benefits are far outweigh the risks. And but I think it's better to have someone help you do it, or at least prepare yourself. If you're not working with somebody like me, read a lot of books and study it. I mean, it's out there. It's no secret. It's not like a new thing. These boards have been around for a long time, and I think with the virtual world, like we're doing right now online, creates a whole new level of accessibility for people to be able to connect and share ideas and have a virtual meeting. It's not quite the same, but it certainly can be very effective. So I'm a big fan of advisory boards. I say it helps turn a founder into a CEO, right? Because it gives people confidence that there's more to the company than just the founder or just the CEO or the president. A great line I like to tell people is, you can blame your board for something. If you're a founder and you can say, let me run that by my board. or that's a great opportunity. I want to make sure I got one of my board members. I want to check with him and see what she thinks about it, whatever it might be. Well, that number one buys you time on making a decision. Number two, it's impressive to say, oh, you have a board and you're going to talk to them. Great. And then you might come back and say, you know, the board didn't like it. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. No, they're never going to meet your board. So you may or may not ever have used the board, but you know, having that board in place gives you the ability to leverage that board for a lot of different things. And again, I wrote a blog article. There were 8 benefits of having a board of advisors. And I don't think I've touched them all, but I think I've touched on maybe half of them here. But there's a lot you can do with a good board of advisors. And like I said, I just think there's a lot more benefit than there is risk. And I think it's underutilized, misunderstood in a lot of cases. And I don't know, I for one have been having a lot of fun doing it, and I like to help other people do it, you know, where it's appropriate. And I appreciate the opportunity here to share some of these stories and perspective with you and your audience. It's great.
Well, thank you, John, for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm just pulling up your blog here, and I'm going to post this in the chat link here so people can just click on that and go directly to your website here, and can get that, you know, gather some information. I'm going to post your link. So johnnyfranchise.com, JOHNNY franchise.com. I'll post a link there so everyone can check out John. I mean, just a wealth of knowledge, just truly incredible. So thank you for being here, John. This is being recorded. We will publish this in probably early next week. It'll be available for a replay. So anyone who missed it, if you'd like to share this maybe with some maybe potential advisory board members or people who are going to help you set up your board, this will be available for anyone on your team to watch who wasn't able to.
Great.
Thanks so much, Tom. Thanks, Johnny.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.